Okay, so at rest, this is the at rest, so nothing is happening here. So you have the sodium channel and you have the potassium channel, and you can see that the membrane potential is negative 70 here. You have the two gates for the sodium channel. You have the activation gate and you have the inactivation gate. Activation gate is closed at rest, inactivation gate is open. And for the potassium, you have only one gate, and that is the activation gate, which is closed. So when these activation gates are closed, it prevents movement of ions. So sodium cannot enter the cell, potassium cannot leave the cell. Okay, so there's nothing is going on, negative 70. Now there is a stimulus comes. Once the stimulus comes, the activation gate, this was the activation gate, open up. Inactivation gate is already open, so nothing is happening. So look at it here. The graph goes up, so it's becoming more positive until it reaches here. So this is the positive 30. So once it reaches here, then something else will happen, okay? But let me show you in the next slide. So, but for now, I mean the next image, but for now, look at here. Potassium, the activation gate of potassium is still closed. So when the ions, sodium ions, enter the cell become more positive. That's called depolarization. Once it reaches positive 30 millivolt, inactivation gate now closes. Activation gate is still open. So this will prevent further movement of ion inside the cell. And so the cell it cannot become more positive because no more sodium enter the cell. But here is now the activation gate of the potassium opens. So once this opens up, potassium leaves the cell. Potassium is positively charged. Once potassium leaves the cell, what will happen? Inside the cell become more negative. See? Now the cell is losing the positive charges. It's becoming more negative. So this is called repolarization. So then what happens that the sodium channel goes back to its resting state. So activation gate is closed, inactivation gate is open. But the potassium channel is still open. So it means more potassium leave the cell. And now inside the cell become more negative. If inside the cell become more negative than negative 70, that is called hyperpolarization. So that is the changes that will happen during an action potential. So once this happens at the end, then you go back to the resting state. So here is two other things that will be discussed here about the refractory period. Okay, so absolute and the relative refractory period. So let me start from here. This is at rest, no stimulus is there, and inside the cell, the membrane potential is negative 70 millivolt. Stimulus comes here, okay, and that is strong enough that goes above the threshold. So negative 60, negative 55, negative 40, depends on the location, okay? It goes above this, and that will cause a depolarization. This is depolarization. So here, the sodium activation gate is open. So more sodium enters the cell. From negative 70, it goes all the way to positive 30. Once it gets here, the inactivation gate will close. Activation gate is open, inactivation gate closed. Okay, and then the potassium gate will open up. So now the potassium is leaving. Potassium is positively charged. Once it leaves, the cell become more and more and more and more negative. Okay, until it gets closer to threshold. So from here to here, that is called absolute refractory period. It means that if you have another stimulus, nothing will happen. Why? Because in this part, the sodium channel is already open, the activation gate, and it will allow sodium to enter. So even if you do any stimulation, there's nothing happening. Sodium is already entering the cell. But once it reaches here, the inactivation gate will close the sodium channel. So even if you have a stimulus, the inactivation gate will not allow more sodium to enter the cell. So this is why it's called absolute refractory period. So once it reaches around here, now sodium goes back to the resting state. Okay, so activation gate is closed, inactivation gate is open. Potassium is still open, and this is why it's becoming more and more and more and more negative. So now it's below -70. So this is the hyperpolarization area. This area is called relative refractory period. Why? Because if you have a regular strength stimulus, nothing will happen because it is farther away from the threshold. The cell is more negative, nothing will happen. But if you have a strong stimulus, then it can overcome the threshold and you can have another action potential. So it can happen, but you need a strong stimulus. And if you don't have it, nothing will happen. That's why it's called relative. So once it, it goes further, the potassium channel will close, and then you will get back the -70, which is at rest. So resting membrane potential will go back to the same state. And then the cell will wait for another stimulus. You have two types of axons here. One is myelinated and the other one is unmyelinated. Okay, so if it is myelinated, this myelination will cause an insulation around the neuron. So it means that the ions cannot leave the cell in that area. So if you have a channel, a sodium channel here, and this is activated, it allows sodium to enter the cell, this area become positive. Okay, so once it reaches in this area, this is called internode. Okay, you have to have another channel here. So when it reaches in this area, so this is the voltage gated channel, and now that the inside the cell is positive, so it will activate this area. So this channel will now open up, and this area become more positive, but these ions cannot leave the cell. And then it jumps from this area all the way to this area. Now this area should have another channel. So then this will activate, it goes to another one. So this will happen throughout the axon. So because it is jumping from one to another like that, okay, and these ions cannot leave the axon. This is why the transmission is very fast here, and that's called saltatory conduction, jumping like a frog from one to another to another. So it's a lot faster. So myelinated axons are thicker and they are faster. Compared with the unmyelinated neurons here. So here you have a voltage gated channel. This is activated. This area becomes positive. You have to have another channel very close to that. If you do not have that, these positive charges will be kicked out by sodium potassium pump. So you have to have another channel very close to that, and then that voltage gated channel become active. Once that become active, that small area, the membrane potential will change, and you have to have another voltage gated channel very close to that, and then that will become active, and this should be another one here, another one here. So these channels should be very close to each other, and every time that they open up, that takes time. So even if it is in a millisecond, but it still takes time. So this is why it is the conduction is a lot slower in unmyelinated axons, and because they don't jump from one area to another area like saltatory conduction, this is why these are called continuous conduction.